Move your truck before I have it towed out of your own garage. Vanessa Whitmore said that while standing under my garage light with rainwater dripping off the edge of her white umbrella, like she owned the property tax records too. Her Lexus SUV was already parked inside my garage behind her, engine ticking softly as it cooled, headlights washing across my tool bench, and the cedar shelves my wife helped me build 12 years ago before the cancer took her. I stood there in the driveway holding a cold coffee thermos in one hand, while rain hammered the metal roof hard enough to drown out the lake wind coming off Blackwater Cove behind the neighborhood. For a second I honestly thought I was misunderstanding what I was looking at. Then Vanessa smiled at me with that polished HOA smile that always looked practiced in a mirror. Community priority parking, she said calmly. Temporary accommodation approved by the board. Temporary. That word would end up costing her almost everything she had. If somebody parked their car inside your garage and acted like you were the problem, what would you do? Comment below with your city and let me see where people are watching from tonight, because this woman turned our neighborhood into a courtroom with flower beds. My name's Grant Holloway, 56 years old, retired commercial electrician. I live in Maple Ridge Estates, just outside Ashford County, Tennessee, where the fog rolls low over the water every morning and the gravel driveways stay muddy half the winter from lake storms pushing inland. Quiet place usually. Fishing docks. Aluminum John boats. Pickup trucks backed into driveways beside old base boats nobody ever sells because every man around here thinks he'll use it again next summer. My garage was the last peaceful thing left in my life. Wet cedar. Machine oil. Old country radio humming low while rain tapped the roof overhead. That garage carried more memories than half the rooms in my house. Vanessa knew that too. Everybody knew, which somehow made what she did worse. She stepped farther inside while I stood there soaked through in the cold night air. You've been difficult lately, she said softly. The board felt this was the best solution until overflow parking is resolved. Overflow parking. We had 23 empty guest spots less than 200 yards away. She wasn't solving parking. She was testing control. Behind her, 2 HOA board members stood awkwardly near the workbench pretending not to look embarrassed. One of them wouldn't even make eye contact with me. That's when I noticed the orange HOA cones near my driveway entrance and a laminated notice zip-tied to my side gate. Unauthorized resident obstruction of community access. I almost laughed. My own property suddenly labeled community access. Rainwater rolled down the back of my neck, while thunder shook somewhere over the lake. Vanessa folded her arms slowly like she'd already won. You can either cooperate, she said quietly, or we can make this much more expensive for you. And right there, standing in my own driveway while her luxury SUV sat inside my garage beside my dead wife's tool cabinet, I realized this woman hadn't just crossed a line. She'd crossed into something she couldn't legally walk back from anymore. I did not argue with Vanessa that night. That surprised her more than if I had yelled. You could see it in the way her smile tightened for half a second before she adjusted it again. People like Vanessa Whitmore lived off reaction. They needed outrage to justify escalation later. Instead, I just looked past her at my own garage. The old yellow shop light above the workbench cast long shadows across the concrete floor, and her Lexus sat there clean and polished beside my rolling tool chest like it belonged in a showroom instead of a man's private property. Rain hammered the roof while cold wind pushed mist up from the lake behind the subdivision. One of the board members finally cleared his throat and muttered, "Maybe we should head out." Vanessa ignored him completely. "The board expects cooperation from residents," she said, "especially residents already under review." Under review. That was new. I had not received a single violation notice in 6 months. For what? I asked calmly. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. Non-compliance concerns. Improper storage visibility. Potential workshop code issues. She said it softly, almost sympathetically, which somehow made it feel dirtier. Then she handed me a folded paper already damp from the rain. Emergency parking accommodation order. No county seal. No legal citation. Just HOA letterhead and Vanessa's signature at the bottom in blue ink. I looked at it for maybe 2 seconds before folding it back up. "You typed this today?" I said. Her expression flickered again. Tiny crack. Community situations evolve quickly. Then she walked past me toward the driveway while her heels clicked against wet concrete. The Lexus stayed exactly where it was. By the time I got inside the house, thunder was rolling hard over the water, and the whole neighborhood smelled like rain-soaked cedar and muddy shoreline. I stood at the kitchen sink watching fog drift between the houses while my coffee went cold in my hand. Across the street, curtains moved. People had been watching. Maple Ridge had become that kind of neighborhood over the last 3 years. Quiet conversations stopped when certain people walked by. Residents suddenly remembered appointments whenever Vanessa approached during HOA meetings. Nobody wanted trouble, especially not older homeowners living on fixed incomes. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Wade Mercer from 2 houses down. Former dock contractor. Good man. Barely spoke above a mumble most days. Do not answer this by text. The message read. She did this before. That sat in my chest heavier than I expected. I called him immediately. He picked up on the second ring, but stayed silent for a few seconds like he regretted answering already. I could hear rain hitting metal somewhere near him. Probably his fishing shed by the water. What do you mean before? I asked. Wade exhaled slowly. 3 summers ago, she used the Keller's garage during the regatta festival. Said it was temporary overflow too. What happened? Another pause. They moved out 6 months later. I leaned against the counter and stared toward my garage through the dark hallway. Why did nobody report it? Wade laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Report it to who, Grant? Vanessa is the board. Then he lowered his voice even more. You need to understand something. Half the people in this neighborhood are scared of that woman. The next morning, the social fallout started. Residents who usually waved during morning walks suddenly stared at the pavement. At the diner off Route 8, conversations lowered when I walked in carrying my thermos. Old men near the pie counter glanced toward me, then toward the rain-covered windows facing Maple Ridge like they were already hearing versions of the story changing shape. By noon, somebody had posted in the neighborhood Facebook group that I was resisting temporary community accommodations. Vanessa herself commented underneath with a praying hands emoji and the words, "We are trying to resolve this peacefully." Peacefully. Meanwhile, her car was still sitting inside my garage beside my late wife's woodworking cabinet while I parked my pickup outside in the rain like a visitor at my own house. And somewhere deep down beneath the anger, something colder started forming. Because peaceful people do not secretly move their vehicle into another man's garage at night and then try to convince the neighborhood, it was cooperation. By the 3rd day, the neighborhood had split into 2 kinds of people. The ones pretending nothing strange was happening, and the ones watching quietly from behind curtains waiting to see who blinked first. Rain stayed over Ashford County all week, thick gray weather rolling off the lake and pressing fog low across Maple Ridge every morning until the fishing docks looked half swallowed by smoke. My pickup sat outside under dripping oak branches while Vanessa's Lexus stayed dry inside my garage beside 20 years of tools and memories she had no right to stand near. I stopped opening the garage door completely after I caught 2 residents slowing down in golf carts to look inside like it had become some kind of public exhibit. Humiliation spreads fast in neighborhoods like that. Faster than truth ever does. Wednesday morning, I drove into town before sunrise and parked outside Callahan's Diner near the courthouse square. The place smelled like bacon grease, wet denim, and burnt coffee the way small Tennessee diners always do after heavy rain. Nobody spoke much that morning. Just forks against plates and weather reports humming softly from an old television mounted near the pie case. I spotted Evelyn Mercer sitting alone in a booth near the fogged-up front window. Wade's sister. Retired county clerk. Sharp woman. She motioned me over before I even ordered coffee. You look tired, she said quietly once I sat down. Hard to sleep when somebody parks inside your life, I answered. That got the smallest smile out of her. Then she slid a folded napkin across the table with 3 addresses written on it. What is this? I asked. Evelyn glanced toward the windows before lowering her voice. Homes Vanessa accessed during emergency compliance inspections. I stared at the list for a second. You telling me she has done this more than once? Evelyn stirred cream into her coffee slowly. Grant, people around here got used to surrendering little things to keep peace. Storage access, gate codes, garage remotes, spare keys. She always framed it as community safety. A cold feeling moved through me then. Not anger exactly. Worse, recognition. Because suddenly the fake emergency parking order from my driveway stopped looking impulsive. It looked practiced. How many people? I asked. Evelyn exhaled through her nose. Enough that nobody wants to testify publicly. Outside the diner courthouse, rain rattled against parked pickup trucks while fog drifted low across Main Street. For the first time since this started, I realized Vanessa had not just built authority in Maple Ridge. She had built fear. And fear changes people. It teaches grown adults to avoid eye contact in grocery aisles and whisper in parking lots like they are discussing organized crime instead of an HOA president with a white Lexus and color-coded binders. Back at the neighborhood that afternoon, another escalation was already waiting for me. 2 bright orange violation notices had been taped to my front door in plastic sleeves to protect them from the rain. Unauthorized exterior vehicle storage. Improper driveway presentation. Fine pending $75 per day. I laughed out loud standing there under the porch roof while cold rainwater dripped from my jacket sleeves. My pickup had sat in that driveway for 8 years without a single complaint. Vanessa was manufacturing violations now because she needed pressure. Needed me angry. Needed me unstable enough to look unreasonable in front of the neighborhood. Instead, I took photographs of everything, folded the notices carefully, and walked next door to speak with Bill and Dorothy Henderson. Sweet couple in their late 70s. Been in Maple Ridge since the subdivision opened. Dorothy opened the door only halfway when she saw me standing there. "We cannot get involved," she whispered immediately before I even spoke. That hurt more than I expected. "I am not asking you to," I said gently. "I just need to know if Vanessa ever asked for access to your garage." Dorothy looked over her shoulder first. Then Bill appeared behind her wearing an old flannel jacket and the exhausted expression of a man tired of swallowing his own opinions. "She had copies made," he muttered quietly. "Said it was for emergency storm access after the flooding 3 years ago." My stomach tightened. Copies of what? Bill looked me dead in the eye then. "Garage remotes." And suddenly the way Vanessa parked inside my garage without forcing entry made horrifyingly perfect sense. That night I sat alone in the garage for almost an hour without turning on the radio. Just the sound of rain tapping the metal roof above me and the low electric hum from Vanessa's Lexus cooling in the corner like an unwanted guest refusing to leave. The air smelled like wet cedar, machine oil, and muddy lake wind blowing in through the side vents. I kept staring at the vehicle sitting 6 feet from my late wife's cabinet, wondering how many other people in Maple Ridge had stood inside their own homes feeling this same quiet violation while convincing themselves it was easier not to fight. That thought bothered me worse than the actual trespass. Fear spreads differently in neighborhoods with money. Nobody screams. Nobody calls it abuse. They just slowly surrender pieces of normal life until somebody with a clipboard controls the atmosphere of an entire street. Thursday morning, the fog over Blackwater Cove hung so low you could barely see the fishing docks from the main road. I drove into town again, this time to Ashford County Hardware on Franklin Avenue, because I wanted to ask something simple without making it sound simple. The owner, Marty Givens, had been cutting keys and programming garage remotes in that town since Reagan was president. He looked up from behind the counter when I walked in carrying my old garage opener. "Morning, Grant. Need to ask you something strange," I said. Marty gave a tired half-smile. "Around here that usually means HOA." I set the remote on the counter. "Can somebody duplicate one of these without the homeowner physically present?" Marty leaned back slightly. "Depends who asks. Humor me." He picked up the remote and turned it over in his hand while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond town. "Older systems like yours?" "Yeah, you can clone them if somebody has temporary access." My jaw tightened. "Would there be records?" Marty nodded slowly toward the computer near the register. "If it was done here, sure." Then his expression shifted. "Grant, what exactly is going on?" I did not answer immediately. Through the front windows, I could see courthouse rain falling hard across Main Street, while people hurried under umbrellas carrying takeout coffee and legal folders between offices. Quiet little county town. Everybody always thinks scandals happen somewhere else until one lands in the subdivision beside theirs. Marty clicked through old customer invoices for almost 30 seconds before stopping suddenly. His eyes narrowed. "Well now." I stepped closer. There it was on the screen. Maple Ridge Community Safety Access Initiative. 27 garage remote duplications billed under HOA maintenance reimbursement 18 months earlier. Authorized by Vanessa Whitmore. My stomach dropped so fast I actually had to steady myself against the counter edge. 27. Not 1 or 2 emergency remotes. 27 homeowners. Did residents approve this? I asked quietly. Marty shook his head. Hell if I know. Vanessa said the board signed off after those flood warnings. Then he lowered his voice. Grant, I probably should not say this, but some folks came in upset afterward, claimed they never consented. Suddenly, every weird story from the last few years started connecting in my head. Residents talking about items moved in garages during inspections. Strange HOA notices referencing things visible only from inside storage spaces. Vanessa always knowing exactly who stored what where. It had never been neighborhood gossip. It had been surveillance. I drove home through steady rain with my pulse pounding harder the closer I got to Maple Ridge. And when I turned onto my street, social pressure hit me immediately. 3 residents standing near the mailboxes stopped talking the second my pickup rolled past. One woman actually grabbed her husband's arm and pulled him away before I parked. Like I was radioactive now. Like resisting Vanessa had somehow become more dangerous than what she actually did. But the real shift happened 20 minutes later when I opened my front door and found another laminated notice waiting on the mat. Final warning before enforcement action. Only this time somebody had handwritten one extra sentence across the bottom in blue marker. Stop embarrassing the community. I stared at those 4 words for a long time while cold wind rattled the porch screens behind me. Because that was the moment I finally understood what Vanessa feared most. Not lawsuits. Not county officials. Not legal exposure. Public embarrassment. And once I realized that, the entire balance of power in Maple Ridge started changing. Friday morning arrived cold enough that fog clung to the lake like smoke trapped against the shoreline. Maple Ridge looked quieter than usual, but it was the kind of quiet that meant people were talking behind closed doors instead of outside beside their mailboxes. I could feel it the second I backed my pickup down the gravel driveway. Curtains shifted. A golf cart slowed near the corner before turning away too fast. Somebody had posted photos of my house online overnight because by breakfast half the neighborhood already knew about the handwritten warning left on my porch. The narrative was changing now. Not completely in my favor yet, but changing enough to make Vanessa nervous. Nervous people escalate. Around 9, that morning my phone rang while I was standing in the garage staring at the Lexus. The smell of wet cedar and motor oil filled the air while rainwater tapped steadily against the side gutters outside. The caller ID showed Maple Ridge HOA office. I almost let it ring out. Instead, I answered calmly. Vanessa's voice came smooth and controlled like always. Grant, we need to de-escalate this situation before it becomes embarrassing for everyone. There it was again. Embarrassing. Not illegal. Not inappropriate. Embarrassing. You mean before more residents start asking questions? I said quietly. Silence hung there for a second. Then she shifted tactics immediately. You are creating hostility in the community. Your vehicle is still inside my garage. Temporarily. You copied 27 garage remotes without homeowner consent. Another pause. Longer this time. Rain crackled through the phone line behind her somewhere, and I suddenly pictured her sitting inside that sterile HOA office near the marina clubhouse surrounded by binders and laminated notices trying to calculate exactly how much I knew. You should be careful repeating rumors, she said finally. Rumors usually do not come with invoices from Ashford County Hardware. The silence after that felt different. Heavier. For the first time since this started, Vanessa Whitmore sounded caught off guard. Who exactly have you been speaking with? She asked quietly. Not angry. Careful. That told me everything. People are speaking to me now because they are tired. I answered. There is a difference. She lowered her voice even more. Grant, you really do not understand the liability exposure you are creating for yourself. I almost laughed. Myself. If residents begin panicking over security procedures, property values suffer. Insurance reviews happen. Mortgage lenders notice instability. This neighborhood depends on consistency. There it was. The real motive underneath all the community language. Property values. Reputation. Control. Vanessa had built her authority on the image of Maple Ridge being perfect. Controlled lawns. Quiet residents. No scandals. And now her own car sitting inside another man's garage was turning into exactly the kind of story she could not contain with a Facebook post and a laminated violation notice. Come get your vehicle, I said calmly. Move it yourself. Her tone sharpened for the first time. I do not respond well to ultimatums. Neither do I. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly afterward, which irritated me more than I wanted to admit. Not fear exactly. Exhaustion. The emotional weight of realizing my home had slowly stopped feeling like mine days ago. I looked around the garage, then at the workbench my wife painted dark green herself one summer while old country music played through dusty speakers overhead. Vanessa's Lexus sat 6 feet away from that memory like an insult with leather seats. And something inside me hardened permanently right there. Around noon, another shift hit the neighborhood. Residents started messaging privately. Not publicly. Nobody was brave enough for that yet. But quietly. A widow named Carol Bennett sent screenshots of HOA notices referencing items stored inside her garage during a period when she had been hospitalized. Another resident claimed Vanessa entered his property during a storm evacuation inspection, even though no evacuation order had ever been issued. Piece by piece, the story widened beyond me. This was no longer a parking dispute. It was becoming a pattern. And patterns scare institutions because patterns create liability. By late afternoon, I noticed something else. Vanessa's Lexus had not moved because she had stopped trying to retrieve it, which meant she was no longer thinking emotionally. She was consulting someone. Attorney maybe. Insurance advisor maybe. Either way, the game had changed. Then just before sunset, a black SUV from Ashford Mutual Insurance pulled slowly through Maple Ridge and parked outside the Marina clubhouse while thunder rolled low across the lake. 2 men in rain jackets stepped out carrying clipboards. Residents noticed immediately. Doors cracked open. People stood on porches pretending to check weather while watching the clubhouse through fog and steady rain. And for the first time since this nightmare started, Vanessa Whitmore was the one standing inside a building everyone else was whispering about. Saturday morning, the rain finally stopped, but the pressure hanging over Maple Ridge somehow felt heavier without it. Fog rolled low off Blackwater Cove and drifted between the houses while cold wind rattled the dock cables down by the marina. The neighborhood looked exhausted. People stepped outside holding coffee mugs and pretending to do yard work while watching the clubhouse parking lot from a distance. The black Ashford Mutual SUV was still there. That alone changed everything. Insurance investigators do not spend the night in subdivisions unless somebody is suddenly worried about liability exposure measured in 6 figures. I noticed residents avoiding the clubhouse sidewalk entirely now, like the building itself had become contaminated. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed with a message from Carol Bennett. One sentence. They asked if Vanessa ever entered my garage during hospitalization. Then another message arrived from a resident I barely knew. Insurance wants copies of violation notices. Then another. Suddenly, people who had stayed silent for years were forwarding emails, photographs, screenshots, timestamps. Quietly, carefully, but they were moving now. Fear was starting to change directions. I sat at my kitchen table with the lake barely visible through the fogged windows while documents spread across the wood surface in front of me. HOA notices, property diagrams, maintenance invoices, printed copies of the remote duplication records Marty showed me. For days I had been emotionally reacting to Vanessa's moves without realizing she had already chosen the battlefield. Public pressure, intimidation, social isolation. But sitting there with cold coffee beside me and thunder murmuring somewhere beyond the shoreline, I finally understood something important. Vanessa's entire system depended on ambiguity. She survived by keeping residents uncertain about what was legal and what was merely loud confidence wrapped in HOA language. So I stopped reacting emotionally that morning. Completely. No more angry conversations. No more defending myself in neighborhood gossip threads. I started building structure instead. Around noon, I drove to Ashford County Administrative Services near the courthouse square. Old brick building. Smelled like damp paper and burned coffee from the vending machines near the records office. The kind of place where quiet people make decisions that ruin careers without ever raising their voices. I met with a property compliance supervisor named Elaine Foster. Mid-60s. Sharp eyes. Did not waste words. I explained the situation carefully without dramatics. Unauthorized garage access. Duplicate remotes. HOA board using private residential structures for unofficial storage accommodations. Elaine listened without interrupting while courthouse rain started tapping against the tall windows again outside. Finally, she asked one question. Did the HOA disclose liability transfer documentation to homeowners? Not that I have seen. She leaned back slowly in her chair. Then whoever authorized this may have exposed the association to unauthorized access liability under county residential property statutes. Calm voice. Nuclear sentence. I felt something shift permanently in that office. Not victory. Control. Elaine printed several public guidance documents and slid them across the desk. "Mr. Holloway," she said quietly, "you should formally revoke all third-party access permissions immediately." "Can they still claim emergency authority?" "Not without county emergency designation or written owner consent." Then she paused. "And if there are vehicles being stored inside private garages without owner authorization, insurance carriers are going to become extremely interested." Outside the courthouse, the rain had turned steady again, washing gray water across the sidewalks while people hurried under umbrellas toward parked pickup trucks. I stood there for a minute, letting cold air hit my face while traffic hissed through puddles nearby. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer standing in Vanessa Whitmore's narrative. I was standing in documented county language she could not socially manipulate away. When I got back to Maple Ridge just before dusk, another power shift was waiting. Residents were openly talking now, not whispering. Actual conversations near mailboxes. Somebody had printed screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group showing Vanessa threatening fines against homeowners who questioned the remote program. One resident removed his HOA board support sign entirely while I watched from my driveway. Then I noticed something else. Vanessa's blinds were closed. Completely. Every window dark. No clipboard patrols. No polished walks through the subdivision. Nothing. Which meant she was no longer managing perception. She was managing damage. I walked into my garage slowly after sunset, while cold wind carried the smell of wet cedar and muddy shoreline through the side vents again. The Lexus still sat there under the overhead light exactly where she left it. But now I was looking at it differently. Not as an invasion anymore. As evidence. By Sunday afternoon, Maple Ridge no longer felt like a neighborhood. It felt like a jury room where nobody wanted to be the first person speaking out loud. The weather had turned colder overnight and thick gray clouds pressed low over Blackwater Cove, while hard wind pushed shallow waves against the fishing docks behind the marina. Even the usual sounds felt muted. No lawn equipment. No kids riding bikes. No friendly driveway conversations. Just silence and the occasional crunch of tires across wet gravel. The kind of silence people create when they know something ugly is unfolding in public and they are trying to decide which side history lands on. I spent most of the morning inside the garage replacing the old interior locking brackets along the side rail system. Nothing aggressive. Nothing illegal. Just reinforced private access controls fully permitted under county residential security guidelines Elaine printed for me. Every step documented. Every photograph timestamped. The Lexus remained untouched under the overhead lights while cold air drifted through the side vents carrying the smell of rain-soaked cedar and muddy shoreline. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a community meeting notice. Emergency HOA assembly at the Marina Clubhouse. Attendance strongly encouraged. That wording alone told me Vanessa was losing control. Strong leaders do not beg for attendance. Desperate ones do. I walked over just before 3 while thunder rolled low beyond the lake and residents gathered in clusters beneath umbrellas outside the clubhouse entrance. Nobody greeted Vanessa when she arrived. That was the first real crack. A month earlier, people would have rushed to open doors for her. Now conversations stopped completely when she stepped onto the sidewalk in her cream-colored raincoat, carrying her binder against her chest like armor. The silence around her felt physical. She noticed it too. You could see it in the way her posture stiffened before she forced that polished smile back into place. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere turned even stranger. Folding chairs scraped softly against the floor while rain tapped the windows, and everybody avoided direct eye contact. Vanessa stood near the front podium, pretending everything remained procedural. "We are dealing with harmful misinformation campaigns targeting community leadership," she announced calmly. Not one person nodded. Not one. Then Wade Mercer stood up from the back row holding printed copies of the garage remote invoices from Ashford County Hardware. The room changed instantly. You could feel it, like oxygen leaving the air. Vanessa's expression froze for half a second before she recovered. "Those records were taken wildly out of context," she said. Wade did not sit down. "Did homeowners consent?" Silence. Vanessa adjusted papers inside her binder slowly. "Emergency preparedness procedures were discussed during flood season." "That was not my question." Another resident stood up then. Carol Bennett. Hands shaking slightly, but voice steady. Why did your inspection notice mention storage shelves inside my garage while I was hospitalized in Knoxville? Somebody near the back muttered, Jesus Christ. Vanessa tried smiling again, but now it looked strained around the edges. Carol, I think emotions are clouding important administrative realities. Administrative realities. The phrase landed horribly in that room. Residents started looking at each other instead of at her. Quiet conversations spread row by row. One board member actually moved his chair farther away from Vanessa during the discussion, like physical distance might protect him from whatever was coming next. Then came the moment that truly destroyed her authority. Bill Henderson slowly raised his hand. 81 years old. Vietnam veteran. Barely speaks at meetings. My wife cried after your people entered our garage during the flood warnings, he said quietly. You told us cooperation was mandatory. Nobody moved after that. Rain hammered the clubhouse windows while fog rolled across the marina outside, and Vanessa Whitmore stood completely alone at the front of the room for the first time in years. No applause, no support, no polished control, just silence pressing down from every direction while residents stared at her with the kind of disappointment that hurts worse than anger ever does. And in that moment, she finally realized the one thing powerful people fear most. Once the room stops believing you, authority disappears faster than anybody thinks possible. The collapse accelerated Monday morning. Not loudly, not dramatically. That was the strange part. Maple Ridge started turning against Vanessa Whitmore with the quiet precision of people correcting a mistake they should have stopped years earlier. Fog covered the marina until almost 10 and cold rain drifted sideways across the neighborhood in thin gray sheets, while residents moved slower than usual, watching each other carefully in driveways and mailbox clusters. Nobody wanted to be the last person publicly supporting her anymore. I noticed the change immediately when I walked into Callahan's diner just after sunrise. 3 days earlier, conversations stopped when I entered. That morning, people actually nodded at me. One man pulled out a chair at the counter without saying a word. Another slid a fresh coffee thermos toward me and muttered, "Hell of a thing she pulled." Small gestures. But in small American towns, social gravity changes entire outcomes before lawyers ever arrive. Around 11, the real reversal hit. 2 Ashford County Sheriff vehicles rolled slowly into Maple Ridge with headlights cutting through the lake fog, while residents watched from porches pretending not to stare. No sirens. No drama. Somehow that made it feel more serious. Deputy Nolan Pierce stepped out near the Marina Clubhouse carrying a folder under one arm, while a county investigator from Administrative Services followed behind him in a gray raincoat. People started texting instantly. Phones came out everywhere. Curtains shifted all across the subdivision. Vanessa appeared outside the clubhouse less than a minute later, still dressed perfectly in cream slacks and a dark waterproof coat, but the confidence was gone now. You could see exhaustion underneath the makeup around her eyes. She spotted me standing beside my pickup near the curb, and for the first time since this began, she looked uncertain approaching me. "This is becoming excessive," she said quietly once she got close enough. No smile this time. No polished superiority. Just controlled panic trying to sound composed. County investigators do not usually visit subdivisions over misunderstandings. I looked toward the sheriff vehicles. Maybe they are not calling it a misunderstanding anymore. Her jaw tightened. You encouraged residents to destabilize community leadership. Residents started talking because they realized they were not crazy. That landed harder than I expected. Vanessa glanced away immediately toward the clubhouse windows where people were openly watching now. No pretending anymore. She lowered her voice further. You could still help contain this. Contain. Interesting word choice from someone losing control of the room. Your vehicle is still inside my garage, I said calmly. And now county officials know how it got there. For a second, something cracked emotionally across her face. Not anger. Fear. Genuine fear. Then Deputy Pierce walked over holding a printed document protected inside a plastic sleeve against the rain. Mrs. Whitmore, he said professionally, the board is being instructed to suspend all non-essential property access activities pending county review. Residents standing nearby heard every word. The silence afterward spread fast through the crowd outside the clubhouse. Nobody defended her. Nobody stepped forward. One of her own board members actually backed away toward the parking lot during the conversation, like he wanted witnesses to remember he had not been standing too close when everything collapsed. The county investigator spoke next while rain tapped steadily against the marina roof overhead. We are also requesting disclosure records related to remote duplication authorization and third-party property entry procedures. Vanessa's face drained completely then, because she finally understood this had moved beyond neighborhood politics, beyond intimidation, beyond social manipulation. County review meant documentation. Insurance review meant financial exposure. Sheriff involvement meant official records. And official records do not care how confidently somebody speaks at HOA meetings. By late afternoon, the emergency HOA portal had been locked offline, pending investigation. Residents gathered near the marina in little clusters trading stories openly now while thunder rolled across the lake and wind pushed cold mist through the parking lot. Somebody removed Vanessa's reserved board parking sign before sunset. Nobody stopped them. Nobody even asked who did it. That night, I stood alone in my garage again under the overhead lights listening to rain strike the roof, while Vanessa's Lexus sat exactly where she left it. Only now the entire neighborhood knew whose car it was, and whose garage it was not. 7 days after Vanessa Whitmore parked inside my garage, the fog finally lifted off Blackwater Cove. Not completely, just enough for morning light to break through the clouds and hit the water in thin silver streaks beyond the marina docks. Maple Ridge looked different now, quieter in a healthier way, like a town after a storm finally realizing which trees stayed standing and which ones were hollow all along. I opened the garage just after sunrise while cold lake wind rolled through the driveway carrying the smell of wet cedar and damp gravel. For a few seconds, I simply stood there looking at the Lexus under the overhead lights. Same vehicle, same polished paint, but the emotional weight attached to it had completely changed. A week earlier it represented humiliation, control, violation. Now it looked small somehow, temporary. Evidence from a version of the neighborhood people no longer wanted to defend. Around 8:30 Vanessa arrived alone. No board members, no binder, no umbrella even though courthouse rain still drifted lightly across the subdivision. She looked exhausted in a way expensive clothes cannot hide. Her eyes moved carefully across the garage before settling on the new interior security brackets mounted beside the rails. She noticed immediately that everything had been documented. Photographs, notices, certified revocation copies stacked neatly inside clear folders on the workbench. No emotion, no chaos, just structure. The board voted to suspend me pending review, she said quietly. Her voice sounded smaller without the clubhouse behind it. I nodded once. I heard. She stared at the Lexus for a long moment before speaking again. They are saying there may be civil exposure now. There it was. Not community harmony. Not misunderstandings. Liability. Insurance exposure. Unauthorized entry review. The language had finally changed because reality had forced it to. You built a system nobody questioned, I said calmly. That usually lasts right up until the wrong person stops cooperating. A flicker crossed her face then. Not anger. Shame. Real shame. You could have handled this privately, she whispered. I looked around my garage slowly. At the dark green workbench my wife painted herself. The old fishing rods mounted beside the cabinet. The restored radio sitting near the shelves where her Lexus had cast shadows all week long. You parked inside my life publicly, I answered. The consequences were always going to become public too. Vanessa lowered her eyes after that. No manipulation left. No passive-aggressive control. Just a woman standing in somebody else's garage realizing authority disappears the second people stop fearing it. She handed me the garage remote quietly before backing the Lexus out into the cold morning air. Residents watched from driveways all across Maple Ridge while the vehicle rolled slowly down the street. Nobody waved at her anymore. Nobody approached. Silence followed her the way applause used to. And somehow that silence felt heavier than any punishment county officials could have handed down. By noon, the HOA emergency portal officially announced Vanessa's resignation pending county and insurance review. 2 additional board members stepped down before sunset. Ashford Mutual suspended the association's discretionary property access coverage entirely, while investigators continued reviewing homeowner complaints. Residents started talking openly after that. Not just about Vanessa. About themselves. About the years they spent surrendering peace in exchange for avoiding conflict. The diner conversations changed. People looked each other in the eye again. Bill Henderson shook my hand outside the marina and apologized for staying quiet so long. Carol Bennett dropped off a homemade pecan pie at my front porch with a note that simply read, "Thank you for stopping her." But the part that mattered most happened late that evening after the rain finally ended. I rolled my pickup back inside the garage for the first time in over a week. The tires settled onto familiar concrete, while soft country music played low through the old radio again. I stood there listening to the roof creak gently in the cooling night air while fog drifted quietly across the shoreline beyond Maple Ridge. The garage smelled like cedar, machine oil, and coffee instead of tension. Mine again. Fully mine. And as I shut off the overhead light, I noticed one final thing sitting alone on the workbench beside the returned remote. A sealed county envelope addressed to the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association marked pending additional property access complaints, which meant the story was over for me. But for a lot of people in that neighborhood, the Real investigation had only just begun.